Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series. Today's topic is on Inflation Reduction Act next steps with utilities engaging with state energy offices. Thank you for joining us. Here at the top of the call, I'd like to remind everyone that we will be sending out a recording of this session to all of the attendees. Thank you for joining us. I will go through some quick housekeeping items before I turn it over to our experts. The best way to listen is through your computer audio or headset. You can also dial in. If you, for some reason, lose connection on your computer, you can dial in on a phone. Please use the questions panel to ask any questions. We will be leaving time to have questions at the end. And thank you for joining us this morning. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to Keith to get us started this morning.
Thank you, Emily, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, and thank you for joining today's webinar. As you can see from the agenda today, we are going to be focusing on what is new and changing in the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically how guidance will impact state energy office applications for the rebate allocations, and how utilities impacted may want to engage in that program planning process. And then we'll move on to EVs and what's new there with my colleague James Russell, who's CLEAResult's EV Practice Director. So with that, we'll jump in. Next slide, please, Emily. You know, as I mentioned, I'm Keith Canfield. I'm a portfolio manager at CLEAResult, and honestly, I'm someone who's probably still in this industry today because I was a grantee for Department of Energy funding provided through a state energy office during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA. And it was a process quite similar to what we're seeing today, with the notable exception that IRA funding dwarfs what we saw in the ARRA years. So just as a refresher, although the Inflation Reduction Act is considered a climate bill, it was a sprawling piece of legislation that concerned far more than energy. It takes on drug reform, healthcare benefits, corporate tax and enforcement. Fortunately, since we only have an hour today, I'm going to limit our discussion to the provisions that are most impactful to utility energy efficiency and electrical vehicle programs, because indeed, we do only have an hour. So let's jump in. Next slide, please. You know, one of the things I've noted is even with the newly received guidance from the DOE, there's still a significant amount of ambiguity around the implementation of the law. And look, more guidance is going to be necessary in the coming weeks and months, but that doesn't mean that planning can't begin. So as we move through the discussion today, I want to use this framework to talk about the level of certainty that we have with aspects of the IRA. So briefly, let me just orient you on this diagram and the terms. The best defined quadrant is the upper left quadrant, which is the known knowns. This is identified information with a high degree of relative certainty. The fact that we have these rebate programs and the funding levels are prescribed by legislation, you know, that's a known known. The bottom left quadrant are unknown knowns. And this is knowledge that we may have, but it isn't clear if it will be needed. So an example of that would be the fact that many of the folks on this call run income qualified programs and have a way of qualifying those that participate in those programs. The unknown part is whether that knowledge and those understandings can be applied here, or whether the DOE and the state energy offices will blaze their own trail on income verification. The quadrant where we're going to find probably most things today is the known unknowns. And that's when we know the issue at hand, but we maybe don't have a clear sense for how it's going to be resolved. A great example of this is when these rebates will actually hit your respective markets. So the last quadrant down on the upper, the lower right, is the unknown quadrant, and it's the most difficult to define and plan for. These are items that we're so unaware of that we don't even know we're unaware of them. So it's tough to kind of think of that by its very definition. But if we rewound the clock about 3 or 4 years, pandemics and global supply chain disruptions would be, two of the things that kind of jump to my mind that would end up in this quadrant. So the reason I wanted to just bring this up at this point was really for 2 reasons. I think it gives us a framework that we can plan. We can plan around the known unknowns. There's just a level of ambiguity that's attached to those. And probably more importantly, I'll use this as shorthand as we go through to discuss some of these things that, that are known knowns, that are prescribed by the legislation and pretty tightened down, versus some that, are going to be left up to the states and really have some variability to them. So with that, let's jump in. And next slide, please, Emily. So, as we get into the guidance that DOE issued last month, let's do a quick refresher on the 2 state energy office driven rebate programs that were funded by the Inflation Reduction Act, and some of the items that have changed or modified as a result of the guidance coming out. And the first one is the names have changed. So when the legislation passed last year, the 2 programs were known as HOMES program and then the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program. Well, with the emergence of the DOE's application guidance to the state energy offices, these 2 programs have been renamed. The efficiency side is now the Home Efficiency Rebate Program, and the electrification side is now the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program. Neither one of them really roll off the tongue, so today I'm going to be using the shorthand of efficiency for that Home Efficiency Rebate Program and electrification for the Home Electrification and Rebates and Appliance Rebates Program. And I'm going to try my best not to slip and use the old names that we all have been using for the last year. So with that, next slide, please. I think it's useful to frame how these 2 programs differ and how they're similar. So taking the first 2 items on this table together, the efficiency rebates are open to everyone in that there's no income qualification, where the electrification rebates are open to low and moderate income households only. Somewhat confusingly, both rebate programs do have and do offer higher level of rebates for lower income households. But again, the efficiency side of the programs are not restricted. Eligibility is not restricted by income. Those efficiency rebates, true to their name, require that an energy savings threshold of about 20% be met in order to qualify for those rebates. The electrification rebates do not have any real performance kind of measure attached to them. They're more of a prescriptive rebate. Along those lines, efficient gas measures can be used as part of a home efficiency rebate improvement or scope of work, whereas the electrification side, also true to its name, are just incentives for electrical measures and the supporting infrastructure necessary for safe installation of those. I should note that the traditional weatherization measures, insulation, air sealing, ventilation measures, are incentivized by both programs. And they're part of a strategy that's been really emerging over the last few weeks, really since the guidance dropped from DOE, called envelope first strategy. And I'll talk about that in just a bit, but so more on that later. Next on the list, income assessments. That was clear in the original legislation that a energy assessment would be required on the efficiency side, but prior to the guidance, there wasn't such a requirement for the electrification side of rebates. However, the guidance articulates that for electrification rebates that pose, I think the term is, an unacceptable risk of raising utility bills, a limited home assessment is now required for scopes of work that include an electric heat pump. Now, I'll say that the definition that's in the the guidance of a limited home assessment really looks more like a sizing and energy cost disclosure than a true energy assessment, as we would think about it, like a BPI level assessment or something. But it is stipulated that limited assessment is necessary anytime a heat pump is in the scope of work on the electrification side. Also, for the qualified electrification projects that don't include a heat pump, geotag photos of the equipment being replaced, as well as the new equipment installed, are required. So photo management, storage, and transfer is going to be an issue that we'll have to really work to resolve as these programs roll out. Also on the list, a qualified contractor list is required for both programs. In the electrification side, there's also a qualified partner list. It would be like for retailers and things like that. Point of sale rebates. That's been something that a lot of people seized on early in the legislation. It's clear that is a requirement for the electrification grants or rebates. And this is an item that really can use more guidance detail from DOE as far as the efficiency rebates go. The intent here is to not require low-income households to come out of pocket for expenses that will be, ultimately rebatable. So it's clear that's the program design on electrification. I think it's implied on home efficiency, but less clear. So again, probably some additional guidance is going to be required there. The last two, you can see that retail and multifamily eligibility for both programs. New construction, is really only applies for electrification only, because in new construction there would be no previous energy bills to use to model for the efficiency side. One quick item before we go to the next slide. One quick item I'd like to mention here that's not on the list is that both programs offer incentives payable to the contractor for doing work in low-income homes. They're structured different ways, but both programs offer some sort of incentive for contractors to do that low-income program work. So next slide, please. I mentioned the envelope first strategy that really is starting to emerge really since the guidance came out last month. You'll find that both rebate programs, as I mentioned, have weatherization measures as rebatable measures, and the DOE is becoming more forceful about saying that weatherization measures should be included in virtually all jobs, even those that are primarily electrification. So I've included a link here to one of the most recent articles on that concept on this slide. But again, it seems to be a theme that is becoming more and more pronounced. It really wasn't driven home in the guidance, but in some of the communication since has really come out. Next slide, please. So you've likely seen these rebates before. I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but I will say that these rebates are for low and moderate homeowners only, and that determination is made using area median income, or as we'll say it here, AMI. This is actually a HUD calculation that is made for every jurisdiction in the country. I've actually provided a QR code to a Fannie Mae AMI tool that to me seems to be much more approachable. It's map based than HUD. So this QR code will get you to that tool. I find very helpful. What I should also point out that is new in the guidance, that the guidance seems to treat some of these measures on the electrification side as a starting point, and again seems to indicate that even the rebate amounts may be modified, that what we see here might be considered maximums, but that states can propose lower rebate amounts or even a subset of these authorized measures in their program. So this is kind of a case where a rare case of taking something we thought was a known, was in the legislation and prescribed, and maybe it becomes a known unknown on a state by state level as the programs are customized. So next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, the efficiency programs look very much like residential home performance programs that many utilities offer today. The one wrinkle in this that has gotten a lot of attention over the last year is the ability to have modeled or measured savings calculations in this side of the program, in this rebate program. This is one of the items in the IRA legislation last year that just got a lot of attention. And there were a lot of people that were concerned that the guidance would actually mandate one method over the other. Well, I won't wade into that debate because it would be a long one. But I will say that CLEAResult is method agnostic. We work with both methodologies, and the DOE seems to be agnostic as well. The guidance makes it clear that states can choose in their application to use measured, modeled, or both savings calculations. Excuse me. Most home performance programs, use the modeled approach. It's where, as an energy assessment, it's used modeling software, that calculates the energy use of the house. Those calculations are made. Energy improvements are done, and then the same software is used to estimate the energy savings of the improvements. Probably the biggest news here is that the legislation requires that the modeling software be consistent with the BPI 2400 standard, which is the industry standard for weather normalization and calibrating energy saving estimates that the software is producing with 1 year of prior energy use. So having that as a requirement in the program, it is a certainty that any project that uses the efficiency side of the rebates is going to have energy usage from the utilities to be able to really participate in that program. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and what that impact might be on the utilities. Excuse me. The measured approach uses the same prior year home energy use, but then compares that with the actual energy use measured from the time the improvements are made for a year. So final determination on energy savings for a measured program really doesn't occur until a year after the improvement is completed. I'll also mention that the guidance does seem to allow that if states wish to do so. It lists here, that for 80% AMI or less, that the rebates can cover up to 80% of the project cost. Well, the guidance indicates that states can apply to increase that percentage of the project cap from 80% all the way up to 100% if they wish. In essence, that then matches the 100% that the electrification side offers on their rebate program. So this is something that there were a lot of public comments about this in the comment period. So as being a discrepancy of design, so it seems that's been addressed. So next slide, please. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. Just as a quick recap to show the sheer amount of funding that's available, particularly to multifamily buildings, and especially those with primarily low-income occupants, as the legislation does not provide an electrification maximum incentive cap on those buildings. It does with efficiency, but it doesn't, and legislation does not cap the electrification side, although it's certainly likely that many states will choose to do so. So next slide, please. So one of the things that aspects of of the program that excuse me, of the legislation I like the most are tax credits. These are huge movers on market, or can be. I want to point out these are credits, not deductions. So credits are a one-to-one offset for tax liability. So these over the course of the IRA life are expected to actually have a bigger economic impact than the rebates themselves. So what I'd like to point out is that you've got to have a tax liability for these rebates. So it surely is less applicable toward low or moderate income homeowners. Speaking of complexity, this is probably where I should say that I'm not a tax advisor or accountant, so please consult a tax advisor or accountant or lawyer about the specifics of the provisions on your own program or situation. But I do want to wade into just a bit of the complications on these tax credits, so you'll have a sense for really how it's going to add a level of complexity into the program planning. Most of the items that are listed on this list are capped at an aggregate value of $1,200 a year, but many have specific measure caps as well. So energy audits, for example, have a 30% tax credit, but they're capped at about $150, or they are capped at $150 each year. Same with efficient furnaces and water heaters. They each have a yearly cap at $600 each. Doors, $250 each with a yearly maximum of $500. So again, it's almost on a measure by measure basis. They can have a specific cap and even have requirements on what type of equipment qualifies. So it really is, or can be quite a complex exercise to determine, what the tax credit really could be. I've included a QR code on this one as well. Takes you to energy.gov, has a really good summary of these 25C tax credits. And of course, the IRS website has many more of the specifics. But before I move on, I want to point out that, we talked about the $1,200 limit. That's true, except for electric heat pump water heaters, electric heat pumps, biomass stoves. They have a separate aggregate yearly credit limit of $2,000, meaning the maximum energy improvement tax credit could be $3,200 per year. So huge and market moving amounts there. They're more than just 25C tax credits. I've listed just a couple here. 25D is basically the same 30% tax credit, but for solar and energy storage. And 45L are some tax provisions for new construction. So there are a few other tax credits that my colleague James Russell will address when he talks EVs in just a few minutes. But the bottom line is, when designing particularly market rate programs, utilities really should consider these incentives because they can really improve uptake and interest in existing market rate programs. And they're available now, if I didn't mention that, back to January 1st. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the guidance and jump into that. So you've already heard some of the things that are new in the guidance. There's the bulk of the guidance is about instructions for state energy offices on how to, to fill out the application for these. But we're going to view it more from the lens of what utilities might want or need to know about the process and the opportunities for engagement. But I think it really starts with this. We should all take a second and have a moment of silence and send good thoughts for all of the state energy offices, because by any measure, this is a massive undertaking, and especially for those energy offices that only have a handful of staff. And knowing that there are many other federal opportunities other than what we're talking about here that their governors or legislatures may want them to chase. There's contractor training grants. We'll touch on those in just a minute. Grid resilience, although most of those probably have been submitted by now. Solar for all. I mean, there are several different competing opportunities for state funding. And I think really it's going to require some patience from all the stakeholders in this process as all this is really worked through. You know, and look, every state will be different. The guidance flexibility almost assures that. And we're seeing it already. You know, we've heard from states that expect to roll out programs in spring of 24 and those that are talking third quarter of 2025. The guidance does offer a quick start pathway for states that wish to get a program or pilot started by the end of the year. So there's that. But this guidance for the state energy offices was not a single document. It's really over 160 pages and 5 documents that are all interrelated. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at those a little bit. So, you know, what you have listed, I mentioned they're complex, and this starts to give you a taste of it. For example, the data and tools requirement guide, it outlines over 100 data fields that will need to be tracked for rebate transactions, and also includes a link to 16 sample processing workflows from the Pacific Northwest National Lab that weren't even included in the guidance itself. You know, the list of requirements that states must address to complete the application, it's like 77 items for efficiency and 64 for electrification. So if they're applying for both programs, you can sum that. You know, some items can be deferred and addressed later in the state implementation blueprint, but you know, it's going to be a complex and difficult undertaking. Yeah, I'd even say that the heaviest lift for states will actually be the second, down there in the second bullet point, the implementation blueprint. It has to be filed about at least 60 days before the planned program launch, but it can wait until after funding. But a lot of these areas in that blueprint are really areas that energy offices may look to engage with utilities to complete. So 2 other application documents that I think are worth calling out are the categorical eligibility document and the data access guidelines. I'll touch on the data access in just a bit, but the categorical eligibility document is one that I think utilities with income qualified programs really want to take a look at now. It lists the federal programs such as LIHEAP, Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start, Weatherization Assistance Program, as well as some housing programs like Section 8, Section 202, Section 811, as proxies for verifying household income for these federal rebates. So this is where I think utilities can engage really in 2 ways. First, if your programs already do or could use these same categories to determine eligibility, it's something to consider, right? Second, be ready to make the case to your state energy office that your income qualified program eligibility process should be on the state categorical eligibility list, because they can append and add other programs to those federal programs that I mentioned before. So this, you know, if you're able to accept their proxies for income eligibility, they're able to accept yours, it really makes the programs start to act in a seamless manner as you begin this planning process. So for state energy offices I've talked to, it's the last bullet point on this slide that really gives them the most heartburn. The guidance made it clear that the funding is not going to come, even if approved, is not going to come all in one lump sum, but now there are funding that comes in tranches. And each one of these tranches has a KPI and a metric attached to it. So from the state energy office standpoint, I mean, I surely get it. It adds uncertainty into, you know, the flow of funds, and, you know, maybe even they have to plan for disruptions if they're late on meeting an obligation. You know, how do you handle funding delays if your program is already in the market? So, I mean, I surely can see their point there. But you know, that's what's in the guidance, and it's very specific about certain funding measures and KPIs that have to be met at those different milestones. On the right side too, there's more. I mean, it really is a complex planning process. There are requirements for funding that have certain carve-outs. An example is the state has to reserve a percentage of their funding that is greater than or equal to the percentage of low-income populations within the state population. So again, a lot to plan around here. I think it really is going to keep those energy offices busy for quite some time. Next slide, please. Important to note that timelines are going to be highly variable by state, but there are a few dates on here I just want to point out. In red, just to the right of the center line there, it's in red because it's breaking news. This is something that just came up yesterday. Contractor training grants, that's a $150 million program that's separate than these two rebate programs that we're talking about. It's also a program that the state energy offices have to apply for, and those applications were due or were to be due on September 30th, so a little over 30 days away, right? And it appears that at least NASEO is reporting that that deadline is going to be extended till January 31st. I would say that it's not official until it's actually published, and the administrative declaration is amended. So, but it appears that extension is going to be granted. The other two dates on here that I really think are worth focusing on are August 16th of 2024. States have to opt in or notify the DOE that they intend to apply for these rebate funds. So they really have another year to make that determination. And then once they have done that, they have until January 31st of 2025 to actually get the applications in. For those states that choose not to even notify DOE that they intend to not apply, it's considered to be automatic after that date passes. And the intent, at least expressed by the DOE, is to reallocate any funds for states that opt out among the states that are in or doing well. Lastly, I'll just point out that the last date over there is that these funds are all to be expended by 9/30 of 31, which means that have an end date of approximately 8 years from now. But you could think that if a state does not get their application in until, say, January of 2025, they're really only going to have about 6.5 years. So the clock is ticking now. So next slide, please. So one of the more complex issues for the implementation planners on the utilities is really how these rebates are going to work together. So let's go to the next slide and kind of get into that a little bit. Before we dig in, I would say that this is a great tenet to try to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of complexity. We've already talked about some of it, but when these programs get to the ground, they need to be simple for participants. So next slide, please. And this will show you that that's not actually so easy to do. So here's a quick look at what current information indicates is funding stream compatibility with what's known out there and the known unknowns. When we discussed earlier measured versus model savings on the efficiency side, this is an example of one place where that choice really matters. As you can see here, the efficiency rebates can actually be combined with those electrification or HERE rebates, where the measured savings can't be combined with those. Tax credits, interesting. Guidance is very clear that the tax credits can be used with electrification rebates, but when it comes to efficiency rebate, it is not as clear cut and even less clear when it comes to measured. So additional guidance is going to be required, on combining those income streams. WAP was similar. It was very clear that it can be used in modeled as well as with the electrification grants, but more guidance is going to be needed on whether it can also be used along with the measured approach. Other federal funds, include loans, financing vehicles. The government considers those financial products, not grants or rebates, so they can be used as well. And lastly, probably most important to this group, utility incentives, are outside funds that can be used almost in all combinations. But again, state requirements could put on certain restrictions or tracking obligations. So again, we'll have to. That's a little bit of a known unknown there. What the guidance does make clear is that the stacked rebates should not exceed the total cost of the project, so regardless of the funding sources. So next slide, please. So let's get an example of this complexity, right? So this is a homeowner who is under the 200% poverty level, so that means that they qualify for weatherization assistance. They're also under the 80% AMI, so they could qualify for the electrification rebates. Feasibly they could qualify for $22,000 of assistance with no out-of-pocket costs. So massive amounts of money here. The question from a utility standpoint, particularly for those with income quality qualified programs, where do you play in this arena, right? Is there a place to play in this arena with all that money available with no out-of-pocket cost? Next slide, please. I would say that the moderate income households, it's much clearer, as both the efficiency and the electrification rebates only cover 50% of project costs. They're more obvious points of engagement with utility programs, right? There's the ability to stack rebates, and I'd say really more flexibility here than anywhere else. But remember the part about making these programs simple for participants. It doesn't really look that simple, does it? So next slide, please. So briefly, really almost all sources, the guidance from the DOE, the ACEEE policy papers, BPA policy briefs, utility programs are consistently called out as appropriate partners for these rebate programs. Sometimes they're suggested as starting points, sometimes as administrators, oftentimes, as partners, but always as stakeholders. So with all this complexity, and nuance, where's the best place to start one of these conversations? Well, let's go to the next slide. We have a few thoughts to share on that. I think we've all gotten a taste of the complication. I won't go through each one of these, but again, the energy offices are on the kind of the tip of the spear for all this. And I'd say places that you might want to engage depends on really what aspects of your program you're most concerned about these funds impacting. So again, if you have a contractor network, you already have a quality contractor network, you want to make sure you're preserving that and not losing all those contractors to this flow of money. It's a great place to start to engage. Maybe with those training program grants that we mentioned before, but maybe that's where you want to get started. If you're subject to EERS or regulatory goals, it's probably great to start talking now about grading, about participation, about credit for the savings. All those kind of issues are probably great ones to engage on. If you have a really strongly recognized program, who do you think people are going to call when they hear about new rebates in the market? They're going to call your program. So again, I think these kind of give some ideas on ways to engage and maybe those first conversations that you can have. Next slide, please. My last slide, I'll just mention this. It also has a QR code. This is a data access guidelines. We talked about the need for utility bills and utility bill history. This is where it's really going to come to pass. So you'll probably want to look at this document sooner rather than later. And if the previous slide, none of those avenues to state energy office interaction work for you, this is probably a great place to get involved. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to another aspect of the IRA that's one of my favorites, and that's EVs with my colleague James Russell. So James, over to you.
Thank you, Keith. Hello, everyone. James Russell here. I lead CLEAResult's transportation electrification practice. Now, of course, today we're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, but I do think it helps to remember that in 2021, we had the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was a big win for transportation electrification, including such notable endeavors as the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, a $5 billion program there. So we had the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was a story of infrastructure programs. IRA for EV is mainly a story of tax credits. And I'll echo Keith's disclaimer here. Please consult a tax professional if you're going to pursue any of these, but I'm very happy to give an overview today. Next slide. So in the tax credits, we have credits for manufacturing, for vehicles, and to some degree for charging as well. As we look at all of these areas, we're focused on clean vehicles. There are hydrogen provisions, but our transportation electrification team is focused on clean vehicles defined mainly as those with a battery capacity of 7 kilowatt hours. And here, an important part of IRA is meeting North American assembly requirements. And with tax credits, it's difficult to quantify exactly what the investment will be in any of these areas, but it's going to be big, huge even. The subsidies that this provides for battery manufacturing alone have been estimated to have a value of between $30 billion to as much as $200 billion of federal investment in battery manufacturing over the next decade. And that's exciting, not just in pure dollar terms, but also in what that could do for technology advancement. Over 10 years of that investment, what kind of advances will we see in battery technology, solid state batteries maybe, like these could be game-changing technology advances. So it's very important investments, including in manufacturing, though. In the next slide, I'm really going to focus on vehicles and charging benefits, as that's where we find most of our customers. So for households, you have the clean vehicle credit that's been extended, and previous manufacturing limits have been removed. There are many manufacturers, you can see a list here, that are now meeting the North American and battery content requirements, but the criteria are not easy to validate. You really need to know. I mean, you can show the list of which manufacturers are qualified and see which vehicles on the fueleconomy.gov site, but really until you know the details of the transaction, details as much as the VIN of the vehicle, that's required to confirm what the eligible amount of that credit will be for any particular customer. Along with the clean vehicle credit, we have a new credit, the pre-owned EV credit, which is wonderful to see that opportunity for enhancing equity within EV adoption. Though, again, it's important to look into the details, things like $25,000 sales price cap requirement to purchase from a dealership. Those really need to be understood to prevent any nasty surprises potentially for customers who think they're going to get that credit. On the charging side, the alternative refueling property credit has been extended for a good long time this time, which is great. Final guidance on that is not yet available from the IRS. Some things that we see are that it's including bidirectional charging, which is exciting. Hopefully we can stack that benefit with some utility vehicle to grid, vehicle to building pilots. But it does look like there is going to be a limitation here, a new limitation for that credit to only be applicable in low-income or non-urban census tracts. That was pretty clear. That was coming into legislation on the business side, but frankly, it's a little bit of a surprise to see that in the preliminary guidance on the residential side, and we'll see how it looks in the final guidance. Next slide. On the business side, there's a new commercial vehicle tax credit, which is pretty good, pretty strong under Section 45W. Really good, I think, in the light duty vehicle and into pickups and some cargo vans in the medium duty space based on the amount of the vehicle cost that it can cover. And one thing that was maybe a bit of a surprise here, I don't know if this was intended by the crafters of the legislation, but businesses who lease out vehicles can claim the credit on behalf of the lessee if the transaction meets certain criteria. And again, this is an area where a tax professional would really be needed to qualify that transaction. But anecdotally, we are hearing that plenty of households are getting the value of this credit on a lease. On the one actual program that is coming out of IRA, again on the vehicle side for businesses, is a new EPA program for clean heavy-duty vehicles, offering grants, rebates for vehicles and infrastructure with $1 billion through 2031. The details of that program are still being finalized by EPA. They solicited stakeholder input, which is being reviewed. This could look something like the longstanding Diesel Emission Reduction Act program of EPA, but again, TBD as EPA finalizes those details. The business charging the alternative fueling property tax credit, much like the residential one I just covered, with the only significant difference, again, in the preliminary guidance being that there are labor standards, and you're capped at 6% of project costs. If you don't meet those, hopefully most will meet those prevailing wage and training requirements to be able to claim up to 30% of the project costs. Next slide. So if you're a utility interested in supporting transportation electrification, leveraging IRA, what do you do with that, with all these tax credits? Well, certainly there's an opportunity when you're engaging with the programs that Keith covered, the home electrification program, to be an advocate for EVs and making sure panels are being sized so that homes are being made EV ready as they get those electrification credits. So that's one opportunity. You can also, of course, share information like we shared today, educate customers using your website and other marketing channels. We're constantly updating this information in our Choose EV utility web tools. To promote equity and leverage some of the best IRA benefits, there's an opportunity for targeted marketing and outreach, particularly in those rural and low-income communities where they have the best opportunity to participate in the IRA tax credits. And finally, because there's some good value in the business, on the business side for the vehicle tax credit, potentially for the upcoming EPA program, providing some fleet electrification advisory, could help position business customers to bring some of that funding into your territory. So not so much direct program delivery engagement like there is on the areas that Keith covered, but a lot of ways to be an advocate and leverage and help use this to move the ball forward on transportation electrification in your territory. So quick run through there, and wanted to save a good amount of time for questions, either for myself or probably a lot more for Keith, as he really got into more details, but I'd like to open it up now and see what we have.
All right, thank you, James. Yep, we've had a few questions come in, so I'll just take some of them, at least for the IRA part here on the rebates. One question is, can you touch on the ability of states to ask for an exemption to the 80% project cost cap? So that question is again relating to the efficiency side of the rebates. Right now in the legislation that prescribes that they can get if it's a low-income household, they can get up to $8,000 in rebates based on how much energy savings they're able to get, but that is capped at 80% of project cost. What the DOE guidance is saying now is that the states can ask for a waiver of that and state their own percentage of project cap, so project cost, I should say, and that could be up to 100%. So in other words, it would cover everything, which is the way the electrification grants are written now. They already cover up to 100% of low income expenses or project costs. So okay, let's see. One is what was the BPI standard for modeling? That standard is BPI 2400, and what the guidance now says is that the software has to use a methodology consistent with BPI 2400, which means really that it needs to calibrate whatever savings it's modeling to actual energy bill usage. So meaning it looks at the previous year's energy usage of the house and then calibrates its modeling, its savings estimates by those energy bills. So let's see. Another one is, can states narrow the rebate eligibility for households? So it appears from the guidance, the answer is yes, that states may choose to restrict program eligibility to a narrower set of households or existing conditions or even technologies. So there is that flexibility that seems to be allowable under the law. So, states are not required to offer all the fleet of things. I think a good general rule of thumb, although certainly not a rule, would be that legislation, you can be subtractive, you can be more restrictive. You just can't add to add things that aren't in the legislation, like increase a rebate above those levels that are in the legislation. So a few more coming in. So one other question, listed documents for the State Energy Office on a slide, are those available to the public? Yes, they are. They're all out at the SCEP website, the SCEP, the State Community Energy Program part of the DOE, lists all those documents, and anyone can download them and look at them. I've found personally they're a great cure for insomnia in many cases. So that they are, all those documents I listed are available. One of the other questions that I'm seeing, will these rebates be available to homeowners retroactively? The law does not prohibit that. In fact, it says that rebates could be available, after the enactment of the law. But in reality, the states will choose that, and I think it's going to be really difficult, given some of the complex requirements here, that states will be able to go retroactive with their programs. It's possible, but probably unlikely that states would choose to do that. So I'd say that is still one of those known unknowns, is whether or not the programs will be retroactive or not. Yeah, another question coming in. You said the electrification program is applicable to new construction. Can you explain a little bit how that would work? The electrification side really are primarily kind of prescriptive rebates. So a household could, a new construction that installs, say, a induction stove, a high efficiency heat pump water heater, things like that, would be eligible for those rebates. I think there's probably still some guidance that needs to come out about who actually would apply for those rebates. Is it the builder, or is it the resident that would be the one that would be eligible for that rebate? And that one, I think, is still probably something that needs a little bit more guidance on how that process might work. There is, on the tax credit side, there are those 45L tax credits, and those do appear to be geared toward builders and qualifying for Energy Star homes and Zero Net Ready homes as well. Let's see. Yeah, I think one last one I would say, is there a DOE document or other document that describes how to braid and blend these different funding streams? And that is something that the DOE says on their website. They're in the process of developing that guide. So hopefully we'll have something that makes that slide where I had several question marks on needing more guidance. Hopefully this will help and be especially useful for utility program and how the hows and whys of being able to braid those funds as well. And I think I'll stop there.
Well, as predicted, all questions for you, Keith.
Well, that's just because you were clearer than I was, James.
Of course. Welcome any questions on follow-up anyone had on either side, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time here today, everyone, and thank you to James and Keith for presenting. I just wanted to draw your attention as we close out here to, what can you look for next. You can look at our page, use that QR code to try and get a little more information. We will be sending this presentation, the recording of this presentation out, and then check out our upcoming webinars in this series and see if one of those may interest you. And thank you all for joining again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.